Welcome to Down to Business with V, a show dedicated to bringing you actionable information to help protect you, your families, your businesses, and the community. I'm your host V, and today we're discussing romance scams and how dark cons have added an even darker twist. We've brought in a cybersecurity expert from a leader in cyber safety to shed light on this very dark subject and what to do if you're a victim. You don't want to miss this one. Let's get down to business. From Atlanta, Georgia, to becoming a United States Marine, to Washington, D.C., and every place in between, everybody calls me V. My goal is to bring you resources, education, and knowledge from sources you can trust that informs and protects to safeguard our families, our businesses, and the community. Now let's get down to business. Today we're discussing the ever-evolving criminal landscape regarding romance scams and how cons are making an even darker con darker. Today we have in the studio with us Tanya Dudley. She is the CISO for CoFence. CoFence is a leading provider of protection, detection, and response for email security solutions with advanced AI-based automation to stop phishing attacks. Tanya currently serves as the CISO of CoFence, which has 27 patents, 400 worldwide employees, 5 global phishing defense centers operating 24/7. With over 15 years of cybersecurity experience, Tanya has managed programs in incident response, security awareness, and IT compliance for large global organizations such as Honeywell and Charles Schwab. She is currently an executive committee member for the National Cybersecurity Alliance, working closely with DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, promoting information security best practices and education to organizations around the world. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Tanya, why don't you start off by sharing with our audience what led you into cybersecurity?
Wow. So let me go way back to like 2008. I was looking for a change from the IT compliance position that I was in, and cybersecurity was starting to really, information security was really starting to take off then. So I made a lateral move over into our group in the company I was at, and from there just have evolved throughout the years and just learning different aspects about cybersecurity. It's very fascinating, and it's something that certainly isn't going away as we've seen in the last few years as it gotten more and more publication, right? Just being more in the news with some very high-profile ransom attacks. So there's always something to do in cybersecurity.
Absolutely, and you are correct. It is not going anywhere. We are seeing the landscape evolve, just as I just said, and we're seeing a lot more targeted attacks. I love the fact that it's making news because there was a time when it wasn't,
right?
Which is why this show exists. We wanted our audience to know these are the things that are happening. So we appreciate what you do every day, what CoFence does every day, and how you're protecting organizations and helping keep our businesses and families safe. So Tanya, last season, we had the Pensacola PD on, and we had a digital forensics detective come in, and she talked to our audience about romance scams. And those of us that work in cybersecurity, information security, and fraud mitigation, we know that the threat vectors, like we just said, are constantly changing. For those who might have missed last season's show, can you give them a brief overview of what romance scams are and what they should be looking out for?
Yeah, and just like cybersecurity threats that we've seen in the news the last couple of years, we've had some interesting Netflix series, right? The Tinder Swindler. So it's kind of brought to light a little bit more of what these romance scams are, but it's basically threat actors using, especially with the online dating platforms that are now available, social media, they're finding all kinds of ways that they can, romance these individuals, right, into getting them to curate a relationship with them on this online relationship, and then taking advantage of them, either trying to get money out of them or trying to get them to do some some transactions for them on their behalf. So really just curating a relationship with them online.
Thank you for sharing. And like you said, it's the conversation around this issue has broadened, and thank goodness, because
Right.
there was a time when, like I said, very few people were openly talking about this.
Right.
So it's great that there's more awareness being brought to it on a larger scope and scale. So you work at Cofense. You are all in the cybersecurity, information security, and fraud mitigation game. What are some of the trends that you're seeing?
So what we are seeing is this term called business email compromise, right? And so we see, we specialize in email security and phishing, right? So normal phishing attacks have a link or an attachment in there, but these business email compromises are really just a conversation. And in the past, these were known as maybe 419 scams. It was the Nigerian prince, right, looking to like get you to, spend their inheritance or help you, trying to get you to give them some money. Well, they've transitioned now into attacking, going after businesses to be able to get that money, right? At the end of the day, they're after finances. And so what we see is them asking for different types of transactions. And sometimes they can curate these romance scams victims into helping move their money around, right? Because they can't just ask for money to be sent to them because of all the great things that the banking system has put in place, right, to detect these fraudulent accounts. And so they curate these relationships so that they can get these romance victims to then be the ones that are moving the money for them to be able to get it back to them.
Yes, and in financial sector operations, it's called being a money mule.
Yeah.
So they're romancing them in order to get them to make the transactions
Right.
for them. And you're right, banking has put in so many, detectors, red flags, initiators. The employees are trained
Right.
to identify this type of fraud.
Yeah, and when they
So-
initially started, they were asking for them to wire money, right? And so those were very big red flags. And then because one of our researchers, way back when this started in 2015 is really where this really started to really escalate. He worked with the financial sector with their fraud teams to be able to, they would hand over bank accounts and say, hey, here's another account, that they would then stop that money and sometimes get that money back for the organization that was maybe out that money, that actually wired the money. So that's why they've moved away from just asking for money directly, so that way they can still get those funds and other means of getting those funds.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate. We saw a couple of years back that there was a scam where a financial sector employee detected fraud on a member's account or a client's account, where this particular client had given over his bank account information to a romance scam artist, and she was literally draining the account.
Yeah.
So they were able to pick up on that. But like you said, they're doing more complex vectors right now.
And unfortunately, the numbers, the FBI had published a report every year, the IC3 report, Internet Crimes report that they put out every year, and it's gotten to this year's report that just came out, $43 billion of losses. And we know that that's only what's been reported, and we know that there's several victims that go unreported. So that number is probably much, much higher than that, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, absolutely. Now, Tanya, we discussed, speaking of the FBI,
Right.
you and I were in a brief. You actually presented very interesting information on how these con artists are taking an even darker turn in how they exploit victims. Tell us about this trend in using spiritual rituals and how that's being used to target potential victims.
So really what's happening is, the organized groups within Nigeria, right, that are trying, they recruit, the recruits that are the ones that are doing the online transactions, right, that are, evolving these conversations, but they're recruiting them similar to what we see in the United States with the gang members, right? We hear the Crips and the gangs out of LA, right, where they're trying to, become a member. And so, in order to get their way up into that, the hierarchy of that gang member, they're asking them to do certain things, and sometimes it's, encouraging them to, their culture is about doing these spiritual rituals, sometimes very dark, right? But that by doing these, they believe that they're going to gain higher, have more success in getting that money out of that victim, right? So they really believe in these rituals are going to help them, make their way up into that, crime network organization. So it becomes very dark and scary when you start to like dig into, and that's what some of our researchers have really dug into. Where is this? How is this stemming for, right? Because how do you solve for this crime if you can't understand what's the motive behind it? And when you start to dig a little bit deeper and see some of these motivations that they have to be able to become higher in the hierarchy, right, and leading to these voodoo type rituals, it becomes very dark, something that we don't really like to spend a lot of time on, but you have to really understand that criminal mindset, right, to be able to know how can we get ahead of this and make an impact in it.
Absolutely. And Tanya, I know you mentioned that, this was happening in the Nigerian crime rings, and they're carrying out this. We've also heard of it here in the U.S., where these malicious actors are using spiritual rituals, like you talked about, the voodoo, the hexes, the vexes, whatever you'd like to call them, as a way to target victims, to increase their levels of success with carrying out crimes against them.
Right. Yeah, it becomes very unfortunate. Unfortunately, if you also think about the victim side, right? So they don't realize that they're in this relationship, or that they're, so it's hard for them to see outside of this, right? Because they really truly believe they're in a real relationship, and so it's hard for them to really recognize that. And that's where we really kind of really want to try and get the word out, right? So as maybe if you have family members that maybe are considering online dating, or some of these social media where they say they might have an online friend, really look for different, changes in their behavior, kind of like you would with your teenagers, right? When they start to do, go online and online gaming or something, where you start to look for some characteristics of maybe, emotionally they're being swindled, or convinced to give in, to some of these. Also helping with them to maybe how you protect them. Your aging parents, right? The aging adult. How do you protect their financials, right? Making sure that you have some stopgaps in there to help, so they don't drain their bank account, right, and be out. We hear stories after stories that are very unfortunate, where they've given over a lot of money to these criminals that they can never get back.
Absolutely. It is bizarre, unfortunate, but it is happening.
That's right.
So when we come back, we are going to look a little more at what these romance scams are, how the malicious actors are carrying them out, and how you can protect yourself, your businesses, and your family. We'll be right back.
Every organization is responsible for ensuring cybersecurity. The ability to protect its information systems from impairment or even theft is essential to success. Implementing effective security measures will not only offer liability protection, it will also increase efficiency and productivity. With our cybersecurity workshop, your participants will understand the different types of malware and security breaches. Develop effective prevention methods which will increase overall security. They'll also understand the basic concepts associated with cybersecurity and what a company needs to stay secure.
Find out more about training for you and your organization at vicargroup.com.
Put the keys down, Kevin.
But I'm gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
I guess I have really been looking for love in this dating app. Yep, I'm definitely gonna call a ride home.
Welcome back to Down to Business with V. I'm your host, V, and today we are discussing romance scams and how these dark cons are taking an even darker twist. Today we have in the studio with us Tanya Dudley. She is the Chief Information Security Officer for Cofense. Tanya, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
For those of our audience that might have missed the first segment, can you briefly recap for them what romance scams are, what trends we're seeing, and then this trend of using spiritual rituals to target victims?
Sure. So we'll start with romance scams. So oftentimes somebody believes they're in a relationship with just from an online relationship, right? Not somebody that they know in person. Sometimes these happen on online dating profile websites and applications, or even just from social media, where they might reach out through Facebook or Instagram. Just a common one where you might have that interaction, being able to direct message somebody. They oftentimes will start, nurturing and creating fake profiles to make you believe that you're interacting with a real person. So some of the trends that we're seeing are, we see threat actors nurturing these relationships, and they can take lots of time, right? 2 to 10 years, right? They nurture these relationships over time to be able to get these victims to then either swindle money out of them, or even act on their behalf to be a money mule, as we kind of mentioned before. And then the last part was the rituals, right? So getting into some of the darkness. So many of these threat actors are based out of Nigeria, where we see some interesting cultural behaviors, right? Where they want to make their way up into the hierarchy, or believe that in order for them to be successful in their campaigns, that they need to participate in some of these rituals.
Yeah, very, very dark. And, as I mentioned before in the first segment, we're hearing about this coming out of Nigeria, but we're also hearing stories that this is happening in the U.S.
Yeah.
With different threat actors that are using dark magic,
Right.
to target their victims.
Right. Right. They can also, in those conversations, right, getting their victims to then participate in some of these things, right, because they believe in this in their own environment, right? So if they can try and help their victim, by doing some of these rituals, that maybe they'll be even more successful too.
Very dark, very, very dark. So Tanya, let's talk a little more about some of the trends that you are seeing as CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at Cofins. Talk to us about what you all are seeing in the threat landscape.
Yeah, so particularly when it comes to these types of messages that this group targets, is they're emails that are conversational, right? So they're asking for an action. Back in 2015, when we saw these begin, it was, hey, I need you to wire me some money, spoofing the CEO's name of them, which is kind of where we get the term business email compromise, which the FBI had created that term back in the beginning, but we've kind of moved away from that. And also, they've also moved to where they're not just spoofing the CEO, now they're spoofing maybe some other individuals in the organization, right? Because if it's a familiar name that's still somewhere in the leadership hierarchy, that individual is more likely to respond, right? Because at the end of the day, they want to have that conversation carry on. We've also done some research around how many interactions does it take. In the beginning, they would ask initial for, hey, I need you to wire me some money. Can you get me a gift card? I'm off to a party, or visiting a client. I want to be able to give them a gift. But they are not doing those in that initial one, right? So because we've been able to put some flags in place saying if the email address is spoofed, is not who it really looks like it's coming from, or they've changed their reply to. Having that conversation start can help bypass those maybe detections, machine learning or some AI that they might have in place, that an organization may have in place to detect those. Now they can get a conversation rolling with this individual then. And sometimes they might even take it to a text message saying, hey, I'm not able to get back to my email. Can you text me, or text me at give me your cell phone number, so I can text you, and then they'll take it off the platform, right? Because then they could still go undetected. So oftentimes they'll, initially, it's them, they're asking for money, right? So a lot of this is around asking for money. And we see them asking for gift cards. That is a number one thing that we see when it comes to kind of getting that quick cash. And so how are gift cards being leveraged is now they can take these gift cards to Bitcoin exchanges, where they can then exchange those, direct that person to give me a copy, or just send me a picture of the code on the back, and then I can go ahead and redeem those, put those on those Bitcoin exchanges, and then move the money around to where they ends up in their pocket at the end of the day. Oftentimes they'll start with those gift cards that are worth much more money on those exchanges, right? So an Apple or a Google, they'll start with those high value exchange rates. And if they're not able to, if the individual is saying, well, they don't really have that gift card, I've seen actually, I had a friend who fell victim to this, unfortunately, but she was willing to go to another store, and they said, well, just, what else do they have? And she literally took pictures of all the gift cards. And so they kind of scanned through there and said, okay, well, how about you get us, $400 in this particular gift card, right? So they want anything while they still have you engaged in that conversation. They just want to get something. So they start with the high value ones, and then they kind of go down from there just to get money off to them in the gift cards. And unfortunately, for businesses, this is where it becomes unreported because the dollar amounts are so small, and sometimes maybe the individual is out the money because the company's not going to reimburse them for that $400 because it wasn't really them, right? So it's unfortunate the gift card scams that we see, but it is a really successful one for them. So oftentimes I will tell individuals that I'm working with to, make sure that you're having your CEO or somebody at that senior leadership saying, I'm never going to ask you for gift cards, right? So that employees know I'm not going to respond to this, right? Because that's why they're so successful, is because it's kind of this unknown thing. But the more we can talk about this, the more we can deter that particular tactic from happening.
Absolutely. And Tanya, you shared a story with me about a scam that had taken place at the corporate level, where this one employee would see the CEO, and the CEO would walk by him, and he's like, oh, it's just like as if I never talked to him before.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, this individual, because he was a new hire, right, and so, he started during COVID, and then as they got back to the office, things were starting to unwind, and, things were starting to come up, but this individual was scammed for quite a bit. Like he not only, it started as gift cards, right, and then it went to buying some iPhones, and I need you to pay some other things for me. That ended up being quite a significant amount of money. But then as they got back into the office, the leader had told me how, he noticed when he walked in that the guy was kind of giving him some funny looks, and so it wasn't until afterwards that he put it all together that he was looking at him for kind of that like reassurance, like, hey, I got you, I covered you, right? This was supposed to be on the down low, nobody's supposed to know about it. So it's that kind of thing where you think you're doing a favor for somebody, and it ends up being the person knew nothing about it, right? So really just making sure your employees know that you're not going to ask them for these things.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an incident that happened a few months back. A friend of mine gave me a call. His daughter had been scammed. It started out with the gift cards.
Yes.
So she provided the gift cards. And then they went from the gift cards to making her a money mule.
Yeah.
And when she no longer wanted to participate, she started to get a gut check. When she no longer wanted to participate because something wasn't right here,
Right.
they started with threats,
Yeah.
even pretending to be FBI agents.
Yeah, they can escalate, right? So they don't want to lose that, feed that they've gotten, that they've had success with this person, and they also don't want to be outed too, right? So, yeah, they will amplify those threats, making it more difficult for that person, feeling like, okay, I really do need, because sometimes that works, right? To really threaten that victim, like if you don't pay us, we're going to release this information, or, there's all these bad things that can happen to you as an individual. So that's really kind of where it goes down that dark path too, when people start to realize, oh, I'm being taken here, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Tanya, in the last 3 minutes that we have,
Yes.
can you outline very briefly some red flags that our audience would look for?
Okay, so we'll start with romance scams. Really understanding, do you really know this person, right? Really, if they're not asking you to meet in person, then they're probably a scam. It doesn't take many interactions before you start to realize this isn't real. When it comes to somebody asking you for gift cards, probably a scam, right? We see this over and over. And then within organizations, some things that you should make sure that your employees are following their business process, because they are sending emails asking for, hey, I need you to pay this invoice, but pay it to me instead because Becky's out, so pay it to me. So just making sure that your employees are following their business process when it comes to dealing with money and where to send it.
Tanya, tell our audience what to do if they are a victim.
So first and foremost, if you've encountered a suspicious profile that you have on an online site, make sure you go and report that so that they can take those sites down, or those profiles down. But then secondly, go to the FBI.gov website, and there is a place to submit that you have been a victim, either a romance scam or financial scams, right? So because then they can help mitigate those and look for ways to, you as an individual might see one thing, but they might be able to see where many other people have also been victimized by the same actor.
That is awesome. Yes, definitely visit FBI at ic3.gov or FBI.gov and report it. Tanya, thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly do appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you to our guest today, Tanya Dudley, Chief Information Security Officer for CoFence. Thank you for sharing your insight and your expertise with our audience today. We certainly do appreciate you. If you or someone you know has been a victim of a romance scam, a data breach, or a cybercrime of any type, be sure to reach out to your local police department or the FBI at ic3.gov. I'd like to thank our sponsor today, Vicar Group, LLC. They are business consultants for Generation U. You can reach them at www.vicargroup.com. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for watching today. If you have show ideas, if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, be sure to reach out to us at info@dtbwithv.com. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our crew, which makes this show happen every week. I'd like to thank Hannah, Eric, Peter, Stephen, and of course, Doug and Suzanne for all you do. We certainly do appreciate you as well. I'm your host, V. This is Down to Business with V. We'll see you next time.